On this, the November 10th, 2023 edition of What's Going On with Shipping, has the U.S. returned the Iron Dome systems back to Israel? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, we have been following the situation regarding the motor vessel Cape Orlando from the attempted boardings of the vessel back down in Oakland, California, to the protests that erupted around the ship when it was up in Tacoma, Washington. The ship has since set sail for destinations unknown. A lot of the questions surrounding this vessel was it was going to load back Iron Dome air defense systems that the U.S. had obtained from Israel and return them back to them. In the second video, the Cape Orlando and Tacoma, I mentioned the fact that I kind of suspected that there was another ship that was returning the Iron Dome system and was in the process of doing it. I didn't mention the ship. I didn't talk about it because the ship was in the process of doing it. But since then, information has come out about the ship that's been released by the Israeli government. So I want to talk about it in today's episode. If you're new to the channel, hey, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's take a look at this story.
Dramatic demonstration at the Port of Oakland. Protesters are basically clinging to the ladder of a ship. They've been there for hours to prevent it from leaving, and they claim it is carrying military aid for Israel. So the show of support for Palestinians in Gaza grew throughout the day, prompting a significant police presence. But just after 3 this afternoon, the 3 protesters who scaled the ship were arrested, and the Cape Orlando headed out to sea.
Main roads that lead to the Port of Tacoma end
Palestine!
where rallies begin.
Stop bombing Gaza now!
Today, crowds of people protested against aid for Israel and pledged support for Palestine.
We just blocked off several of these streets leading up here to the port.
Groups of people stationed at several different entry points rallied for more than 10 hours, pointing attention toward the military ship Cape Orlando.
We have sources that indicate to us that there is a military cargo that is going to be put on this ship here. We can't confirm whether it's been put on yet.
So that first story was from KPIX in the Bay Area, talking about the delay of Cape Orlando from sailing from Oakland. 3 people boarded the vessel. Cape Orlando is one of 48 ships in the Department of Transportation's Ready Reserve Force. This is a pool of vessels that is maintained by the Maritime Administration along the U.S. East, Gulf, and West Coast. The ships are intended for use in times of war, national emergency, or when commercial ships are not available to move U.S. military cargo. The ship was delayed because 3 boarders came on board. They actually attached themselves to the pilot ladder. The protesters breached the fence. They got into the port area, which is a violation, and then illegally boarded the vessel. The ship eventually sailed with the 3 protesters on board and then offloaded them with the U.S. Coast Guard, who had come on board to protect the ship, off Treasure Island. The ship then proceeded onward toward Tacoma to load military cargo in the Port of Tacoma, which led to another protest and strike. That actually shut down entrance to the Port of Tacoma for a day, but the cargo for the Cape Orlando was already on the port. So the only thing that the protesters did was stop the import of lattes into Tacoma that day. They really didn't stop the loading of the ship at all. And the military cargo in question is this. This is the Iron Dome missile defense system. The U.S. obtained 2 of these, and I'll talk about this in a second, but this is the system that's being used to counter the Hamas missiles that are being launched from Gaza into the area. Very sophisticated system. It's been in use since 2011. They're able to launch these missiles and really nullify the inbound rockets. Now, it's not a big system. I mean, it's not tremendous. There are control units, there are missile launchers. It's not a lot of square footage. It's not big at all, but it made it sound like I raised a lot of questions about the idea that why would you get a ship the size of Cape Orlando, which has these huge, massive decks inside for vertical storage, to load a series of missile launchers on board and then sail it to Israel. Understand, it is 29 days to get from Tacoma to Israel, depending on which way you go, either through the Panama Canal or through the Red Sea and go to the southern port of Eilat, or through the Suez Canal to the ports of Haifa. So it didn't make a lot of sense for this to happen. This is the story about the Iron Dome deal. This is back in 2019 when the U.S. contracted to obtain 2 Iron Dome systems from Israel. This is a story just the other day, November 8th, that Israel may buy back Iron Dome air defense leased from the U.S. There was an earlier story about this from Reuters in the middle of October. As Israel could buy the 2 U.S. Army-owned Iron Dome air defense batteries sent to the country when the current lease comes to an end next year, Army Acquisition Chief Doug Bush told reporters in a November 7th briefing. The U.S. is sending its 2 Iron Dome batteries to Israel to bolster the 10 it already has as Israel continues to fight Hamas. Air defense is crucial. Goes back down here to Bush. It's a lease for a relatively small amount of money for 11 months. It could become a case where they decide to just keep the systems and pay for them, or we can come up with some other arrangements at the end of the initial 11-month period, depending on factors on the ground. The idea of Iron Dome was one was supposed to go into Guam, another was sent down to Fort Bliss for training, but supposedly they were all up in Fort Lewis for storage until they were being used, which raises the question again, if Israel needs Iron Dome right now to defend against Hamas, they're probably not going to wait very long to get it there. And the idea of putting it on Cape Orlando and sailing it all the way across 29 days didn't make much sense. This is Cape Orlando sorting from Oakland, California. And one of the things you'll notice is it looks like it's right here off the coast of Oregon. It's not. That's when it turned off its AIS transponder. AIS, Automated Information System, is what all ships have to broadcast their position. It's a requirement put on ships by the International Maritime Organization. However, Cape Orlando is a government-owned ship. It's owned by the Department of Transportation and involved in a Department of Defense operation. And ships owned by governments do not have to squawk AIS. So the ship turned off its AIS transponder. We were able to track it coming into Tacoma because of tugs and Coast Guard boats that were with it. But Cape Tacoma, when it's sorted, has not turned it back on. So they're running dark right now. So we don't know where they're going. The Department of Defense has refused to announce where the ship is going. I sent a request into the Public Information Office at the United States Transportation Command. They said that they wouldn't answer that question. They are putting all questions to the State Department for answering, and I have not yet received it. While that was going on, and I did my video on the Cape Orlando up in Tacoma, I referenced that there was a ship that was in the process of moving that I believed was more likely, if you were getting Iron Dome back to Israel, this was the ship that was doing it. So this is the Cornhusker State, another Ready Reserve Force vessels. You can always identify Ready Reserve Force vessels by their gray paint and then their stack colors, a red, white, and blue stack color right back here. The Cornhusker State is a crane ship. Used to be a container ship. This is a very small vessel and a very old vessel. This vessel was built back in the 60s. So we're talking about a ship over 50 years old. There were supposed to have been 12 vessels like this in the Ready Reserve Force. They only built 10, and now there are just 4 remaining, 2 on each coast. The crane ships have been used fairly recently for a variety of missions. The most important mission they've been doing is redistributing ammunition among Army prepositioning war reserves around the world. When you load ammunition on board a vessel, you can't load ammunition in most ports. That's not allowed. There was an event back in World War II called Port Chicago, where 2 ships exploded, killed hundreds, led to a very famous court-martial of 50 African-American sailors. But where you load ammunition on the East Coast is at Sunny Point, Military Ocean Terminal Sunny Point outside of Wilmington. And then on the West Coast, it's up at Indian Island near Tacoma and Seattle. Cornhusker State has been moving these stocks around, and you really want to use a dedicated vessel for this. So they'll break these crane ships out of the Ready Reserve Force and use them to reposition. They can load containers below decks and above decks. The big cranes you see here are not just for loading containers on those vessels, but the way these ships were designed, they were designed to go in and offload other container ships that were going into ports. The war plan was Cold War happens, World War III happens, European ports are hit, the big container cranes are damaged, you can't offload container ships. you would bring a ship like this in, and those cranes would swing over to a container ship that didn't have cranes and offload it to a pier. So those are really long cranes offset to the starboard side. They can reach across onto another ship and offload on the dock. Well, container ships today are way bigger than this, and these crane ships have almost no utility in offloading a modern container ship, but they are useful for moving cargo. This picture was grabbed of Rota, of Cornhusker State in Rota on October 23rd. And I had been watching it because there were a batch of RRF ships in the Mediterranean for exercises and for these movements. But Cornhusker State did not stay in Rota. Matter of fact, what she wound up doing was sailing on October 30th. She sailed on October 30th from Rota, headed into the Mediterranean. We caught her on AIS passing Malta and Sicily, and then she made this run here into the Eastern Mediterranean. And what's interesting here is it looks like she runs to the Eastern Mediterranean and turns around. That's not what happens. Instead, what happens is the last hit of this ship was right around 0001 hours on 5 November, and then the AIS gets turned off. And if you follow this track, and I was following this track, this is a track that's well north of going to the Suez Canal. So the ship wasn't going to the Suez, knew that. This track, if you take that track line and extend it out, takes you right here to the port of Haifa. I don't think they went to Haifa, because when the ship reappeared on AIS, when it popped back up right here on AIS, it was 2.5 days later. It is a one-day sail at 15 knots to Israel. It's another one-day sail back. That leaves half a day, about 11 to 12 hours. Just enough time to offload the cargo that was inside the ship that you couldn't see. Remember, the image of Cornhusker State showed no deck cargo on board, but cargo was below deck. That's about enough time to open the hatches, swing the material off. They don't need to go to a container terminal. They can go to any dock because the ship has cranes and do it. When the ship materializes back about 1100 pull it up here. There we go. About 1000 on 8 November, the track line, if you extrapolate that track line, actually puts it down here to the port of Ashdod, the southern Israeli port. There's also a military facility there. So what I think happened is Cornhusker State potentially loaded military equipment, perhaps the Iron Dome. I don't know that for sure. I don't have confirmation that Iron Dome was loaded on board, but you could pack Iron Dome into C-17s, into military air transports, fly them. Why would you not just fly them right into Israel? Well, C-17s and military aircraft flying into Israel are going to be well observed, and there's always the potential for a shoot down. And you don't want that, especially with something as valuable as an Iron Dome system. Instead, you fly it into Rota, load it on board the ship, sail it across the Mediterranean. When you get between Crete and Cyprus, you turn off your AIS, probably pick up a U.S. Navy escort, get picked up somewhere over here by the Israeli Navy, run into the port of Ashdod, open your hatches, use the cranes to offload, and then head back out. And the reason we think this happens is this tweet put out by the Israeli Ministry of Defense. IMOD and IDF received a cargo ship carrying approximately 2,500 tons of equipment to IDF use. 123 cargo planes and 7 ships carrying more than 7,000 tons of military equipment arrived in Israel since the beginning of the war to ensure the IDF has the resources to achieve its objectives. When you look at that image, this Israeli vessel here, that is the Cornhusker State. There's no other crane ship that's out right now. There's only one other sister ship of Cornhusker State that's still in service, and it's on the East Coast. So this vessel is the Cornhusker State. You'll notice no deck cargo on it. So all the cargo would be below deck coming in. And I got to say that a couple of things about this operation. So number one, if the U.S. Transportation Command and the U.S. military put out that rumor about Cape Orlando going to Tacoma and loading Israeli equipment, that is friggin' genius. You are masters of deception. My hat's off to you, ladies and gentlemen. That was fantastic. You absolutely deceived everybody in doing that. On the other side, it could be a pure coincidence. It could be just pure coincidence that rumor got out that the distraction was going on over on the west coast of the United States, while Cornhusker State is clandestinely sailing across the Mediterranean and delivering equipment, potentially the Iron Dome system, back to Israel for use of in their air defense. Or again, just pure coincidence, and it just happens. And in which case, we, the United States of America, is once again the beneficiary of pure dumb luck that always seems to fall in the laps of Americans. I don't know, but it's a really interesting use of open source intelligence to take a look at this. Let me be clear. I knew about this days ago, and I am not going to release information like that while the operation is happening. I know there's a lot of open source people out there who love to tell you what's going on and try to get a jump on things. I am not going to do that. I'm not going to risk the lives of merchant mariners. I'm not going to risk the lives of IDF and U.S. Navy sailors in doing this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not. But I was watching it, and once the Israeli Defense Force posted this, the Ministry of Defense posted this, then I figured I'd go ahead and put it. I don't know for sure that Iron Dome was on this ship. I do know there's 2,500 tons of equipment that's on this ship. I do know that the U.S. has run tankers into Israel to provide them with the necessary jet fuel to do that. I've seen several U.S. flagged tankers do that. So we are providing aid and support into Israel. I will not tell you when and where they're going. I'll tell you afterwards, but I won't tell you when they're doing it. So again, really interesting use of at-sea maritime logistics. Cape Orlando still running dark, probably being used for equipment rotation in and around the Pacific. That's what I envisioned. That cargo that those protesters were protesting was already on the dock in Tacoma. What I was told is it was trucks, it was some helicopters, containers, not a lot of gear, but it was enough that probably part of a normal rotation. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until our next piece of open source intelligence comes out with breaking news and deep intelligence, and I flawed on my opening credit here because I have a big red arrow pointing at something. You know, you need to have that big red arrow to point at something to get the hits on your thumbnail. Not doing it. Till our next video, this is Sal, signing off.